Okay, I want to talk now about three areas of psychology, I guess we'd call it, psychoses, dissociative disorders, and demonic possession. And again, these are orders that, you know, the psychoses and the dissociative disorders are disorders that seem very bizarre, right? You just have to walk into downtown Ventura and see people on the street hallucinating, you know, floridly, and you see some pretty bizarre behaviors going on right there. So typically when people think of bizarre mental illnesses, you know, pretty much psychoses come to mind right away. And I start this lecture by giving you a bit of a case study of a guy I had in the hospital who we'll call him Scott. And he was a patient I was assigned to when I first started working at the sister hospital, the Camarillo State Hospital, Agnew State Hospital up in San Jose, California. And Scott was identified as the most difficult patient in the entire facility. He had broken bones of nurses, broken cheekbones and collarbones and arms of some of the nurses he worked with. He was a big, tall guy. He was spent most of the day in 6-point restraints because he was so violent. And so I showed up and they just said, you know, here, you're the new guy, so here's your hazing ritual. We're going to give you this guy as your patient. And so I went down and worked with him for many, many years. He had, over time, had ended up becoming paraplegic because they didn't know why, but probably he'd gotten in a fight with somebody and somebody had smashed his head or his neck on the floor or something, and he's basically confined to a wheelchair. He's still very, very strong in his upper body, headbutted people, all sorts of things, and not like where he spent much of his time in 6-point restraints just sort of screaming to himself. And very interesting guy. He was dual diagnosed with psychosis and autism. We weren't sure what one. He was nonverbal, so we really couldn't tell. He also had developmental disorders. And he was an interesting guy. So I'd go and work with this guy, and you know, and he'd be sort of like screaming in bed, tied up, you know. And I was talking to the physician on the unit one day, and she told me, she looked at me, she said, you know, if we were living back in the 1500s, we would diagnose Scott as being possessed by a demon. I thought about that. I thought, wow, that is really interesting. And I had a sense of him, like you'd sense the guy, you know, he had an IQ of about like 50. But sometimes, you know, he would look at you and suddenly start smiling and laughing. You got a sense that there was some other presence there, right? And I started thinking about that. It's very interesting. Long story short, it took us many, many years. We did a lot of research on him, and eventually we were able to try him on a drug that was new at the time, which was Zoloft. SSRI drugs were just coming out at that time, and we got him on Zoloft. It took us a long time to get the hospital to agree to put him on it. And whether he was demonically possessed or not, whatever was going on, either he or the demon seemed to like Zoloft. Zoloft and a very small dose of antipsychotic medication, really small, because in the past they give him a small dose and he'd done better, and they go, oh, if a little bit is good, then a lot must be better. And they gave him a bigger dose, and then he started having all these anticholinergic reactions and things, and had a lot of problems with that made his behavior worse. So we gave him a very, very small dose. I think he was on Haldol or something, a very small dose, and a little SSRI, and within about a year or so, he would calm down. He was actually able to go out and be in the day room with people and not, you know, attack people, and wasn't violent anymore. Still looked like he was demonically possessed, but at least the demon was kind of happy. So he was one of actually my success stories at working at the hospital. But I mentioned him because he was a guy, again, we couldn't tell what was going on with him, right? And again, in past time, I'm sure in past times he would have been diagnosed as being possessed by a demon. Okay.